Well, thank you very much for the kind introduction. My task will be to talk about yet another special relationship, namely the German-Russian relationship, and to that extent with the first of the three challenges which Jochen Krause pointed out to you, namely Russia. When you look at the website of the German Foreign Ministry, and look under the item of German foreign policy, and you go down then the list on the various items, and you then go to strategische Schwerpunkte der Außenpolitik der Bundesrepublik Deutschland, the regional concentrations. Then you find some surprising entry there, heading, namely the strategic partnership Germany-Russia. And that goes back essentially to 1999, the idea of the strategic partnership between Germany and Russia. Namely, at the time in 1999, Germany had the chairmanship of the Council of the European Union, and the first so-called instrument under the European Common Defense Policy was the strategic relationship with Russia, the common strategy of the European Union towards Russia. And this was not in that document conceived of to be some distant division to which Germany and Russia should aspire, but it was the idea that this was already established fact. And that this established fact ought to be then improved and perfected, so to speak. One of the means according to which this was to be developed was the concept which was developed in 2008, even some months before the Russian intervention in Georgia in August. This is the idea of the modernization partnership. And that both of these ideas, strategic and modernization partnerships, were meant to bring Russia, so to speak, up to par, and to use, again, one of the technical terms for these conceptual approaches, that an attempt was to be made of einbinden, that Russia was to be bound into common Western institutions, including also, this was one of the ideas, that the European Neighborhood Policy, ENP, was designed to include Russia, but Russia did not have any interest to be included in this approach, as well as, of course, the attempt to einbinden Russia into NATO by virtue of the NATO-Russia Council and the Partnership for Peace programs, etc. And this was related to yet another conceptual approach that was developed by political scientists. One could call it the concept of transitology. Namely, the idea was that Russia, after the collapse of the Soviet-type system in the country, and in line with the developments of the East Central European countries and the Baltic states, that after the collapse of such systems, one-party states with the command economy, then you would have a significant contraction or if a precipitous decline of economic affairs, that the political institutions would first disintegrate. But then generally you would have, after a period of evening out, you would have then a resurgence of stability and economic progress. You would have the establishment of democratic institutions. You would have fair competition within the framework of a market economy and a developing active society, civil society. Now, this concept indeed, as applied to, say, the Baltic states, but also to Poland, but also to Hungary, to Czech Republic, etc., worked. But the idea that this was also work in the Russian context did not materialize. We had the establishment, and see it to this very day, of a system sui generis, which specialists called the Putin system. There was another assumption which was guiding German policy towards Russia within the context of the overall framework of Ostpolitik. And that was the idea that which Egon Bahr, even the Soviet era, had pioneered, of Wandel durch Annäherung, change through rapprochement, which had a dual focus, essentially, namely one focus being the change through continued engagement, particularly in the economic sphere, for the different conduct of Russian, then Soviet, foreign policy, but at the same time also domestic political dimension, that the system would be eroded, so to speak, from the inside. So you would have then a Wandel, a change of both foreign policy and of the system, and one being. So what? Why this incursion into these conceptual approaches? The reason why is because the intervention, or the annexation of the Crimea in 2014, last year, as well as even more so, the de facto military intervention in eastern Ukraine shattered all these comfortable notions that the reality of the relationship turned out not to be in any sense strategic, nor was it even in a realistic sense possible to speak of partnership. Nothing came of this Steinmeier idea of modernization partnership. And this was all shelved essentially in this period from the fall and winter of 2011 to 2012, the spring, in the context of the parliamentary elections in December of 2011 and the presidential elections of 2012. And this idea, which was put forward by Medvedev when he was president in this tandem arrangement between 2008 and 2012, of indeed the modernization with also a social, in addition to a technological economic dimension. This was as a result of crisis of legitimacy in that period, fall to 2011 and spring 2012, was replaced. And the idea of modernization was put aside. And what we have seen instead is, under Putin, Roman numeral 3, is national patriotic mobilization. Now, this indeed is a major challenge to not just established assumptions by policymakers, but it's a challenge for the conduct of policy. To put the main proposition to you, in a nutshell, I would say that in the German foreign policy establishment, up to including in the Chancellor's office and in the Foreign Office, but in also other ministries and in public opinion, in the political parties, that perceptions of Russia have changed significantly, if not to say dramatically. But when you look at the actual conduct of policy towards Russia, there is a much more mixed picture that is to be seen. It's not quite clear whether or not this special relationship has undergone and will continue to undergo, if indeed it is true that there is a basic shift in German approach towards Russia, that it will last. We see quite a number of signs that one of the main indicators of this change, namely economic sanctions against Russia, whether these will be maintained. And when you look into the individual parties and also the participants in the coalition government of the party, you hear very contradictory signals. For instance, on the issue of sanctions and Ukraine, one of the most astounding statements that were made recently, that was before it became clear that Russia was not really participating very much in the aerial campaign against ISIS, but had its particular targets which it was picking, and the assumption being not just by the foreign ministry, but also in the chancellor's office, that yes, Russia is actually playing a constructive role in trying to bring about a political solution in Syria. That the Vice Chancellor and also Minister of Economics, namely Sigmar Gabriel, he came out with a statement: if Russia were to continue to play a constructive role in Syria, as it had already, with regard to come back to what Johan Claus was saying, the construction of an agreement with Iran, then the sanctions could be lifted. And the other condition then being, of course, that there would be progress, which is interesting as a formulation, progress with the implementation of the Minsk Roman numeral 2 agreement. So this is an indication that there is in the ruling parties there is this desire to try to get back to normal, and some kind of feeling among representatives of government and in parliament that this annexation of Crimea and this demonstration of the use of force in Eastern Europe is just like a bad dream. And that one would wake up after this Albtraum, and things would just be going back to normal. I personally think that this is a completely erroneous assumption. I think that there is a significant change in Russian domestic and foreign policy, which may not last, and I hope it won't last. But the idea that from day one to the next there will be a reconsideration and a major change, that I think is really quite optimistic. Now there is another indication, namely since I was talking earlier about this conceptual approach to use economics as a lever to induce change in previously Soviet Union, currently in Russia. The economic dimension, of course, is very important, and when you look at it as an indicator of what relations are like and what they could possibly be like, look, for instance, at the gas and dependency issue, which was raised by the previous speakers, namely, is Germany making concessions because of gas dependency? Now, I don't think that this is the case and will be the case, but at the same time, there is still this persisting idea that with the engagement, continued engagement with economic exchanges, that you may be able to moderate the Russian foreign policy behavior. And what I should have said at the beginning also, when trying to characterize the conceptual approaches, is that Ostpolitik, in essentially during the Soviet period up to Crimea, one can say, really was Russia first policy. That all the other countries, despite European neighborhood policy and despite Eastern Partnership, really did not really matter very much, and to specifically focus the attention on Ukraine. That Ukraine always took a secondary role to the policies and approaches towards Russia. Now, one of the approaches which Russia has been taking towards Ukraine has been to put maximum pressure economically on the country to try to prevent it from first embarking on the association agreement with the European Union. And then after it was clear that it was going to take that road, to actually punish Ukraine for it. You can actually measure it in facts and figures by looking at the gas price, which over time has been charged to Ukraine in conditions where they were listening to Russian arguments. Then the gas price was low, and once That was under Yanukovych, and once the Maidan revolution then took off and was successful, then the gas price was suddenly raised to tremendous heights. So one of the main this is one other argument I would like to suggest to you. One of the ways actually to try to frustrate Russian designs in East and Central Europe, and particularly with Ukraine, is to do the maximum to try to bring about stability, political stability in Ukraine. And you can only do that if you improve the economic state of affairs. And that would also mean if you counteract the policies of economic pressure by Russia. Now here we come to the gas issue. Namely, as you well know, in the Schröder era, we had the construction of Nord Stream, the gas pipeline from Vyborg in Russia to Greifswald in Germany, with a capacity of 55 billion cubic meters of natural gas. Now, to get back to Ukraine, at the height of the economic exchanges east-west and the carrying capacity or the volume of gas that was flowing through Ukrainian pipelines to Europe amounted to about 118 billion cubic meters of natural gas. And then as the economic relations and as we had the two gas crises between Ukraine and Russia, then it was reduced to lower figures. Now, the stated goal, which when Miller and Putin this year visited Ankara, Miller stated that quite clearly, that the purpose of the cancellation of a South Stream, but the then reconstruction of the concept, the idea of the Turkish Stream was to, quote, bring down the gas flow through Ukrainian pipelines to zero. Evidently not for commercial, but for political reasons. And this is why I'm saying that this gas dimension is very important, because now, in September, agreements were signed between the Western gas companies and the Gazprom on the Russian side, that yet another string of two pipelines, Nord Stream, Roman numeral 2, will lead from Russia to Germany, with yet another capacity of 55 billion cubic meters of natural gas flowing through, which means that this is the implementation, so to speak, de facto, of the Gazprom plan to divest itself and to divest Ukraine from any gas flow through Ukraine to Europe, which means that a loss of more than $2 billion US annually. To come back to the main line of the argument then is that the idea that in addition to these changes in perception which I've outlined, and with the collapse of these illusions about strategic partnership and modernization partnership, transitology and that when you look at the actual policies which are being conducted, they are far from conforming to the notion that we have come to the end of special relationship and that we will have a complete reconsideration of policies in addition to perceptions. Thank you.